Ladies and gentlemen, let's stop pretending. Let's stop dancing around the edges of this firestorm and start calling things what they are. Because the so-called conflict between Iran, America, and Israel is not some ancient tribal rivalry. It's not just about religion. It's not even purely about nuclear weapons. No, this is a war of power, paranoia, and politics disguised in the language of morality. Let's start with America, the self-proclaimed guardian of freedom and democracy. For decades, it has appointed itself as the global referee, yet plays the game with dirty hands. It invades nations, topples governments, then lectures the world on peace. It shouts about Iran's nuclear ambitions while sitting on the largest arsenal of nukes in human history. Hypocrisy? No, it's more sinister than that. It's calculated, because Iran is not a threat due to its weapons. Iran is a threat because it refuses to bow. Then there's Israel, armed to the teeth, backed by billions of dollars in US aid, enjoying unconditional diplomatic cover, while continuing a military occupation that defies international law. When Israel strikes, it's called self-defense. When Iran reacts, it's called terrorism. When a Palestinian child is killed, the world looks away. But if Iran even whispers support, it's labeled a sponsor of extremism.
Double standards?
Absolutely. But more than that, it's a geopolitical narrative rigged in advance. And now, Iran, the nation that dared to stand alone, sanctioned, demonized, isolated. But why? Because it has oil. Because it supports groups that challenge Israel's dominance. Or is it simply because it won't kneel before the American empire? Iran has its faults, no doubt, but it's painted as the villain, not for what it does, but for what it resists. It resists the idea that the West has the right to dictate the future of the East. This triangle of hostility is not a clash of civilizations, it's a battle of control. Control over the narrative, control over the resources, and most of all, control over who gets to be called the hero and who must wear the mask of the enemy. Iran is demonized, not because it is uniquely evil, but because it dares to challenge the existing order. Because it questions a system where bombs dropped by Western allies are called precision and resistance by others is labeled terror. And the media, they play their part perfectly. Headlines echo the voice of power. Dissent is drowned under a tsunami of propaganda. We are told what to think, what to fear, and who to blame. But we are never told to question why these same players are always at the center of global chaos. We are never told to ask who profits from endless war, instability, and fear. So here's the truth. This is not a fight for peace, freedom, or security. It's a fight to preserve dominance. It's a battle to silence independence. It's a war of narrative versus reality, and the victims are the millions of innocent people caught in the crossfire, their voices crushed beneath tanks, sanctions, and silence. But the world is changing. People are waking up, the lies are wearing thin, and now the choice is ours. Will we stay silent, obedient to a script written in the shadows, or will we speak up loudly, unapologetically, and demand a new conversation, a conversation based not on propaganda, but on principle, not on power, but on justice? Stand up. Speak the truth. Because the fight isn't just theirs anymore, it's ours too. Why is Iran really in the crosshairs of the world's most powerful nations? Is it genuinely about nuclear weapons? Or is that just the cover story that's been repeated so often it sounds like fact? Because if this were truly about weapons of mass destruction, the world would be united against every state that possesses them, including allies like Israel, India, and even the United States itself. But they aren't. Instead, the full weight of economic warfare, diplomatic isolation, and military pressure is reserved for one particular nation, Iran. Why? Because Iran dares to disobey. Here's what no one in the mainstream dares to say out loud. This isn't about preventing war, it's about preventing defiance. Iran is one of the few nations in the Middle East that has remained escape the orbit of US control. It doesn't host American bases. It doesn't beg for approval from the White House. It doesn't recognize the state of Israel, and it doesn't trade its oil on Western terms. For that, it has become public enemy number one, not because it's building a bomb, but because it refuses to be another obedient client state in a region the West believes it owns. Ask yourself, Where was the global outrage when Israel refused to sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty? Where were the crippling sanctions when India tested nuclear weapons? Why is there no media frenzy over the US arsenal that could destroy the planet many times over? The difference is simple. Those nations are seen as part of the acceptable order. Iran is not. And in the twisted calculus of global politics, independence is a crime more dangerous than war itself. This is not about morality, it's about control. Iran sits on massive oil reserves and a geostrategic crossroads. Whoever dominates Iran can dictate the economic and military balance of the entire Middle East. That's why the West has never stopped meddling, from the CIA-backed coup in 1953 that overthrew a democratically elected prime minister to the endless sanctions and threats today. The pattern is clear. Submission is rewarded. Resistance is punished. And the nuclear card, it's a convenient distraction. It's used to justify aggression, sell fear to the public, and rally allies under the illusion of a common threat. But the real fear in Washington and Tel Aviv isn't that Iran will attack. It's that Iran will inspire other nations to stand up, inspire a movement against hegemony, inspire people to believe that there is an alternative to living under the thumb of Western imperialism. So when they say it's about nukes, what they really mean is it's about non-compliance. Iran's crime isn't what it's building, it's what it refuses to dismantle, its sovereignty, its ideology, and its resistance. The West doesn't fear what Iran might do with a bomb. It fears what the world might do if Iran proves that standing tall without one is possible. Let's pull back the curtain on America's foreign policy in the Middle East and look beyond the smooth-talking diplomats' carefully scripted press briefings and so-called international rules. The truth is far more sinister, far more hypocritical, and deliberately concealed. The United States claims to be the guardian of peace and stability, the defender of human rights, and the global referee for justice. But when it comes to Iran, this moral theater collapses under the weight of its double standards. And those double standards are not accidental, they are strategic. America condemns Iran for supporting militias and resistance groups, yet continues to sell billions in weapons to regimes like Saudi Arabia, regimes that have bombed schools, hospitals, and wedding halls in Yemen with American-made missiles. It accuses Iran of destabilizing the region while it invades Iraq under false pretenses, tears Libya apart, arms extremist factions in Syria, and leaves behind failed states in its wake. The result? Chaos that Iran didn't start, but is always blamed for. And when it comes to nuclear weapons, the hypocrisy grows even louder. Washington shouts about Iran's nuclear ambitions, though Tehran remains a signatory to the Non-Proliferation Treaty and permits inspections. Meanwhile, America maintains the largest and deadliest nuclear arsenal on Earth, untouched, uninspected, and unaccountable. It turns a blind eye to Israel's undeclared nuclear weapons, while obsessing over Iran's peaceful uranium enrichment. The message is unmistakable. Some nations have rights, others have restrictions. Some can possess weapons of mass destruction. Others can't even research civilian nuclear energy. The selective outrage isn't limited to weapons, it extends to diplomacy, democracy, and human rights. Iran is labeled a pariah for clamping down on protests, yet America embraces dictators who crush dissent far more violently. It denounces Tehran for a lack of press freedom while cozying up to monarchs who execute journalists. Washington's entire approach to Iran is built not on values, but on interests. If Iran were obedient, if it privatized its oil, opened its markets to American corporations, recognized Israel, and shut down its regional alliances, it would be welcomed with open arms. But because it refuses, it is demonized relentlessly. And that demonization is by design. It creates the justification for sanctions, the excuse for military threats, and the foundation for fear-based propaganda. These double standards are not a flaw in the system, they are the system. They allow America to maintain dominance while appearing virtuous. They create enemies not because those enemies are inherently dangerous, but because their independence challenges the illusion that the US is the world's moral compass. This is the dirty secret behind every press conference, every resolution, every threat of war. America doesn't punish Iran for breaking the rules. It punishes Iran for refusing to play the game, a game where Washington writes the rules, breaks them at will, and still claims to be the referee. What happens when a nation is allowed to act with impunity, shielded by the most powerful empire on earth? What happens when its aggression is disguised as self-defense and its silence is bought with billions in military aid? The answer is Israel, a state that has managed to position itself as both the eternal victim and the untouchable aggressor. And nowhere is this more visible than in its relationship with the United States and the shared hostility toward Iran. But this relationship isn't built on shared values. It's built on shared objectives, dominance, control, and the silencing of resistance. Israel is the only nuclear-armed state in the Middle East, yet it has never signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty, never opened its facilities to international inspection, and never faced consequences for it. It continues a brutal occupation of Palestinian land, builds illegal settlements in violation of international law, and carries out airstrikes in neighboring countries, including Syria and Lebanon. But none of this sparks UN sanctions. None of this prompts a coalition of condemnation. Why? Because Israel enjoys blanket immunity, politically, diplomatically, and militarily, thanks to unwavering American support. When Israeli warplanes bomb Syrian infrastructure, it's called a preemptive strike. When Iranian advisors are killed on foreign soil, it's labeled counterterrorism. When Israeli snipers shoot unarmed protesters at Gaza's border, it's explained away as crowd control. But when Iran arms Hezbollah or supports Palestinian resistance, the West erupts in outrage, calling it terror sponsorship and regional destabilization. The same actions judged by opposite standards. The hypocrisy isn't just glaring, it's weaponized. This double standard doesn't just protect Israel, it emboldens it. With every US veto at the UN Security Council, every billion-dollar military package, every carefully worded press release that avoids condemning Israeli violence, Tel Aviv is given a green light, and it uses that green light not just to defend itself, but to dominate. It extends its control through walls, checkpoints, surveillance, and airstrikes, all under the protective umbrella of American silence. And yet Iran is the one painted as the villain. Iran is the one labeled a threat for simply supporting those who resist this imbalance, for backing Palestinians, for helping defend Syria, for refusing to normalize relations with a state that continues to occupy Arab land. It's not Iran's actions that make it dangerous to the West. It's its audacity to oppose the chosen ally. Israel's role in the Iran-America conflict is not that of a neutral party or a helpless target. It is a central actor with clear aims to maintain regional supremacy, eliminate any threat to its dominance, and ensure that no other regional power, especially one like Iran, rises to challenge its position. The unspoken alliance of American weapons and Israeli ambition is not about defense. It's about empire, a micro-empire in the Middle East, propped up by a global one, determined to crush any force that dares to push back. Why is Iran so relentlessly targeted by the world's most powerful alliance? Why is it sanctioned, smeared, and surrounded on all sides, despite never launching an aggressive war in modern history? The answer lies not in Iran's supposed crimes, but in its refusal to submit. In a world where obedience is rewarded and resistance is punished, Iran's true sin is its sovereignty. It does not take orders from Washington, it does not seek approval from Tel Aviv, and it does not mold itself into the image that the Western world demands from compliant nations. That alone makes it dangerous, not because of what it does, but because of what it represents. Iran is a nation that has survived a US-backed coup, a brutal 8-year war with Saddam Hussein, decades of crippling sanctions, cyber attacks, assassinations of its scientists, and endless psychological warfare. Yet it still stands. That kind of resilience terrifies Western policymakers, not because it threatens their cities with missiles, but because it threatens their illusion of control. Because if Iran can resist the full spectrum of imperial pressure and still assert its identity, what's to stop other nations from doing the same? And make no mistake, Iran's independence is not just political, it's ideological. It rejects the global financial order dominated by Western banks. It trades oil outside of the US dollar, builds its own weapons, strengthens its regional alliances, and maintains a culture of resistance that stands in stark contrast to the submissive client regimes propped up across the region. That ideological resistance is more subversive than any nuclear weapon. It is the seed of rebellion planted in the soil of global hegemony. When Iran speaks, it does not speak the language of begging. It speaks with the voice of a nation that remembers its history, knows its strength, and refuses to be colonized again. That voice challenges the entire post-colonial order the West has built. It tells the world that survival without submission is possible. That sovereignty is not a gift granted by superpowers. It is a right earned and defended, even when the cost is unbearable. That message is a threat to every tyrant in the region and every empire that seeks to rule through fear. This is why Iran is smeared as a rogue state, a terror sponsor, a danger to the international community, a community which conveniently excludes anyone not aligned with US and NATO interests. This is why its culture, its government, its military, and its people are portrayed through a lens of suspicion and hostility. Because Iran's independence doesn't just reject the status quo, it exposes it. It reveals the hypocrisy of Western powers who claim to champion democracy, yet overthrow elected leaders, who preach peace yet profit from endless war, who demand compliance, yet call it partnership. Iran's real threat lies in its refusal to play the game where the board is rigged, the rules are written by empires, and the outcome is predetermined. Iran flips the board over and says, we won't play by your rules. That's why it's targeted, cornered, and attacked on every front, because its very existence challenges the foundations of the global order. What if the real battlefield isn't in the deserts of the Middle East, but in the minds of people watching the news every night? What if the war isn't just waged with missiles and sanctions, but with headlines, camera angles, and selective silence? That's the reality we're living in. The media has become the silent weapon of modern warfare, shaping public opinion with precision, distorting truth with subtlety, and manufacturing consent for policies that destroy lives. In the case of Iran, the role of the media is not just to report, it is to manipulate, to program the public into accepting injustice as security, aggression as peace, and resistance as terrorism. The average person doesn't witness the complexities of Iran's policies or the nuances of its culture. They don't hear the voices of its people, its scholars, its diplomats. What they see are repeated images of angry faces, fiery slogans, and missile parades, stripped of context, delivered without explanation. They hear the same words repeated like a drumbeat: nuclear threat, radical regime, terror sponsor. And over time, these words don't just describe Iran, they define it. They become the lens through which every action is interpreted, no matter how defensive or justified. This is not journalism. It's narrative warfare. When a Western ally bombs a foreign country, it's called a targeted strike. When Iran responds to an act of aggression, it's called escalation. When Israel assassinates a scientist on Iranian soil, it's framed as a necessary preemptive measure. But if Iran even dares to retaliate, it's condemned as destabilizing. The media doesn't just relay these biases, it reinforces them. It acts as an amplifier for power, ensuring that the side with the biggest bombs also has the loudest voice. The coverage of Iran is almost always devoid of history. There is no mention of the 1953 CIA coup that overthrew a democratic Iranian government, no discussion of the 8-year war with Iraq that was backed by Western powers, no exploration of how sanctions have crippled the Iranian economy and hurt ordinary people. Instead, Iran is presented as a spontaneous threat, as if its resistance emerged out of a vacuum rather than decades of provocation. And it's not just what the media says, it's what it doesn't say. It doesn't show the thousands of Iranian doctors, engineers, and artists. It doesn't cover Iran's humanitarian outreach to its neighbors. It doesn't highlight the country's technological progress, its university systems, or its cultural depth. Why? Because humanizing Iran would make it harder to demonize. And demonization is essential when you want to justify sanctions, airstrikes, and isolation. This control of narrative is not accidental, it's strategic. It allows governments to act brutally abroad while maintaining the image of moral authority at home. It ensures that the public remains confused, misinformed, and disinterested. And when dissent does emerge, it is quickly silenced or dismissed as sympathy for the enemy. The battlefield is not just in the Gulf, it's on your screen, in your newsfeed, and in the silence between the lines. What if this conflict between Iran, America, and Israel isn't just some distant geopolitical drama? What if it's not only about diplomats, missiles, or desert wars? What if, in truth, this fight is shaping your world more than you realize, from the price of your groceries to the surveillance on your phone, to the erosion of your freedoms under the illusion of security? Because this isn't just their fight, it's our fight. And pretending we're not affected is the most dangerous delusion of all. Every time a Western leader stokes tension with Iran, markets shake. Oil prices surge. Inflation spreads like wildfire. Economic instability trickles into everyday life, from higher energy bills to collapsing currencies in the global south. This geopolitical triangle is not some isolated event on a map. It's a fuse wired directly into the global economy. When war drums beat in the Strait of Hormuz, wallets are emptied in London, Karachi, New York, and Nairobi. But that's just the start. This endless hostility justifies the expansion of state power. Under the banner of national security, surveillance increases, censorship expands, and fear becomes the tool to silence dissent. The rhetoric of the so-called Iranian threat gives Western governments the license to spy on their citizens, silence journalists, militarize borders, and pump billions into defense contractors, while schools and hospitals fall into decay. The enemy abroad becomes the excuse for control at home. And all the while, the media keeps the population distracted, divided, and docile. But the consequences stretch even deeper, as the narrative around Iran is shaped to create a one-dimensional villain. It reinforces a global climate of division and dehumanization. Ordinary Iranians, students, mothers, children, doctors are treated with suspicion. Diaspora communities are racially profiled, denied opportunities, and painted with the same broad brush of potential threat. Meanwhile, the real threat, the machinery of empire, the constant push for endless war, remains unquestioned and untouched. And then there's the moral cost. What happens to our humanity when we watch the suffering of millions under sanctions and call it necessary pressure? What happens to truth when voices from the other side are silenced, banned, or mocked into irrelevance? When hospitals can't get medicine because of economic blockades? When scientists are assassinated with foreign drones? When entire economies are crippled to break political will and the world shrugs, we lose something profound, the ability to recognize injustice, unless it's happening to us. This conflict has become the blueprint for how the powerful maintain their grip on the world. It teaches smaller nations that independence is punishable. It teaches citizens that truth is whatever the loudest voice says it is. It teaches the next generation that war is normal, resistance is dangerous, and questioning power is treason. Whether we live in Tehran or Toronto, this fight has been brought to our doorstep through manipulated narratives, economic manipulation, fear-driven policy, and the steady erosion of freedoms under the guise of safety.